a wonderful woman who studies or ornamentals and cultivar plants that are really good for urban bees, both wild communities and our managed honeybees. So there you go. Without any further ado, I'm gonna give this platform to Natalia to go.
All right, thank you. Let me see if I can share my screen. There we go. Can everybody see that? You just nod your head.
Yep.
Awesome. Thanks. Okay, like Judy said, my name is Natalia. And if you guys have questions along the way, feel free to interrupt or put it in the chat. And if I miss it as we're talking, we'll go through it at the end. So I'll make sure that everything's answered. Also at the end, the last slide has my email on it, my email address. And so if you have questions after or that you don't want to talk or ask here, feel free to email me. And also if you just want the PowerPoint instead of the recording, I can send you that as well. Or I can send it to Randall and Judy and you guys can share it, like however you guys do it. I'm okay with everybody having it. So whatever. Okay, let's get started about plants because it's almost spring. First of all, I have to get rid of all of you people. Thanks, babe. Look what just showed up.
Is that a Bloody Mary?
That's my Bloody Mary. I feel like I'm being healthy if I have one of those. Okay, so I did fall plants for somebody. I can't remember who I talked to or did a talk for. But what we're going to do, we're going to focus just on today is spring buildup. And I kind of cut spring off as anything that was done blooming by the end of May. And I realize that some of you guys you have different bloom times and different seasons across the states, but obviously it'll vary a little bit, but definitely by the end of May, I'm going to say is June for the purposes of this talk. Hopefully you know this, that pollen is a protein. It's made up of 10 different amino acids that honeybees require for good health. And not all flowers and pollen have all 10 amino acids. So that's why it's super imperative that you have a diverse planting system that your bees are able to feed from to make sure that they get all 10. And the pollen is found on the male bits of the flowers that we're not going to talk about today because we're drinking and I don't want to talk about flower sex. That's another day. Nectar is a carb and it's made up of a few sugars, but the big three are sucrose, glucose, and fructose. And again, different flowers have different sugar makeup. And nectar is maybe a little bit more volatile than pollen. Humidity, temperature, wind, time of day, the amount and the quality will vary substantially. So even if you do have just buku amounts of high flower nectaring plants, you could still have a very dry season. And I just wanted to talk about these pictures here specifically. These are all examples, well, they're not, two of these are examples of extrafloral nectaries. So if you look in that bottom right-hand picture, that is the base of, let's say, a plum flower. I can't remember what it is, but let's just say that. So that's at the very, very center and the very base of the inside of the flower, and the petals are around it and kind of out of the screen. So that's where you usually find the nectar, that very watery looking substance right there. That's all nectar. And so that's usually where you'll find bees and insects foraging for nectar on flowers. If a plant has extrafloral nectaries, it means that they have nectaries or nectar producing spots somewhere else on the plant itself, not necessarily just in the center of that flower. So this top middle picture is a peony bud, and the edges of the flowers, of the flower petals, actually secrete nectar. So that's why you see ants feeding on peony buds. It's not that, it has nothing to do with opening the flower. It doesn't require, the peony doesn't require it. It just has them. And ants have found this out and taken advantage of it and feed on peonies until they open and they kind of dry out a little bit. The same thing with this picture down here in the bottom left. There's another ant feeding at that little red, looks like a little cup. Then there's another one right here. That's the extra floral nectary. This is partridge pea. And so there's nectar being produced along this leaf stem. So not only will plants have nectar in the flowers, but possibly elsewhere along the plant. Just something to be aware of. A lot of flowers have nectar guides. So what we see on the left is not necessarily what the bees see that's on the right. And so it's just like, I always use the example of guiding an airplane into like the loading dock, you know, like it's like the flags, the guy that guides you here. This is where you need to go. This is where the good stuff is that you want. And so the flowers have evolved that over time. Not all of them have it. And some of them are much more noticeable under UV light than others. Some are bigger, some are smaller. It kind of just varies depending on the flower. I did not hear that, so I'm going to keep going. Oops. So the major plant families that you're going to encounter as far as feeding bees, and not just in the spring, but also throughout the season. These are kind of the top 5, and pretty much everything that bees are going to be feeding on will be in one of these 5. The rose family, the bean family, the mint family, the mustard family, and the aster family or the sunflower family. And even within those families themselves, there will be different bloom times. And so something that might be blooming in the rose family in April, there might be another rose family member that blooms in late June. So another way to keep in mind or to look to make sure that you have a diverse planting is, ask yourself if you have plants that are in different plant families and are things blooming at different times? Or do you have everything blooming from June 1st to June 15th and then nothing else and it's a dearth? Then you'd want to rectify that and start planting things in the spring that bloom in spring and in the fall. Okay, so when we're talking about spring and honeybees, woody plants, so trees and shrubs, are most important, and they're more important in the spring than probably any other season. And this is a list of trees and shrubs that should be found in whatever state and area you're in. And behind the name, in parentheses, I have if it's either a nectar source or pollen source, or if it's both, then it's N-P. And so some of these you guys will be very familiar with, red maple. Everybody talks about red maple being so important early in the spring, and it is. It's very important. Unfortunately, it usually blooms before in temperatures that are a little too cold for honeybees to be flying. But sometimes they overlap and they actually can benefit. And so I don't necessarily want to spend a whole lot of time talking about each one of these. And like I said, you're welcome to the slide if you didn't know if quince is a pollen or a nectar source or something like that. But I did want to talk about just a few that are a little less known than maple. And flowering quince is one of them. Flowering quince is a pollen source. It's very, very early. It's one of the earlier shrubs that will bloom. I personally think it's kind of ugly, but to each his own. And if you're planting for bees, then who cares? This is probably the biggest one that I've seen in this picture. They're usually more around the 4 to 5 feet tall and spread. And they bloom along these woody stems that have pretty serious thorns, or at least the older varieties do. And the leaves are just starting to come out. So the leaves are very tiny. So the flowers themselves are pretty conspicuous. So, you know, if you like it, if you don't, if you need a hedge, it makes a great hedge, privacy hedge because of the thorns, especially if you are getting some of the older varieties, the thorns are pretty substantial. It only comes in, I've really only ever seen it in shades of red and pinkish orange. There is a white one, it's harder to find, and there's technically a yellow one as well, but it's also a different species. And so I can't quite speak to if it's the same quality of pollen as just regular flowering quince.
Are they native or introduced?
I believe they're introduced. Almost everything that I'm going to talk about today is introduced. They need full sun and well-drained soil, and they are hardy from zones 5 to 9. So again, I'm not going to really talk about anything that's not hardy here for obvious reasons. Okay, hopefully you know black locust and how, let's say it's notorious. How about that? It's a fantastic nectar pollen source for bees. It's beautiful. It's in the bean family. You can see these long pendulous white blooms that really only bloom, gosh, for about 10 days to 2 weeks. I'd say usually by Memorial Day, it's done. Or in the middle of its bloom time. It's just a regular locust tree, 30 to 50 feet tall, roughly. It does colonize, and it has serious spines that are surpass the term of thorns. They are spines. The reason why it's notorious is that it's incredibly aggressive. I don't believe in any of the states where you guys are tuning in from, none of them have it listed as invasive. And I'm not even sure if there's an invasive standing anywhere. It's definitely controlled in some states. It's been naturalized to the entire United States, but it's native to kind of the Appalachian range. But it stands and survives and tolerates all kinds of soils. And so it's pretty much US wide. So do I recommend you plant it? Probably not, unless you have 200 acres and then you're ready to manage. And by manage, I mean have like goats. Would I recommend you take it out if you already have it? No. So it's a great plant. It's just got some issues that you need to be aware of. And Ohio buckeye is another great nectar source. This is actually a native to the United States, hence the name. It always has these leaflets. It's a palmate leaf arrangement of 5 to 7 leaflets, and those flowers that you see there in that cluster are always kind of this reddish or yellowish green, excuse me. It tolerates a lot of different soils, but it prefers full sun to part shade. Dappled shade would probably be better. But it does very well in any of the zones that we have. It's a small tree, has a very rounded habit. Some of the other buckeyes are more shrub in form, but this is actually a small tree, and it's a really great native to have.
Is that the same as a horse chestnut?
That is not the same as a horse chestnut. Horse chestnuts have red flowers and a much different habit. And then as far as, so if that was trees and shrubs in that list that you saw in the beginning, and then this would be herbaceous. And so herbaceous means that the plant material dies down to the ground every year. And it's either perennial, which means it comes back every year, or it's an annual, and there's only one annual on here, and it's Sweet Alyssum. It's that picture that you see right there. And so that means an annual means that it completes its life cycle in 1 year. So it grows vegetatively, it produces flowers, it sets seeds, it dies. Hellebore, candy tuft are both nectar sources very early. Chives, another plant that's not aggressive, but can seed, let's say that, but is a great pollen source. Bachelor button, Sweet Alyssum, again, are both nectar sources. And then I just want to talk about bulbs a little bit because I feel like they kind of get overlooked as far as feeding honeybees and weeds because they're arguably more important than anything else that we're talking about. Okay, so I just want to talk about some of the bulbs that you'll see honeybees feeding at. And this first one is winter aconite. It's super short, 2 to 5 inches tall, and I've never seen it 5 inches tall, to be honest. It's always this bright yellow color. It blooms very early. Snow can still be on the ground. And it really prefers full sun when it's blooming, but then it needs shade and cooler type situations in the summer. So a woodland type situation when it's blooming before any of the trees have leafed out. And so it has the full sun. And then as the trees, the canopy leaves out, then it gets shade for the summer. And so that's usually where you'll find it. It does tolerate deer and it can grow under black walnut. So it's nice for that. And it is definitely a high pollen source. Siberian squill is another little bulb. It is shorter, it's a little bit bigger. Early to mid-season bloom, very strappy, kind of leathery foliage. It's almost always purple, but you can find it in white or pink varieties. Again, deer leave it alone, and it has great pollen. And you can see in this picture right here of little Miss Bee collecting blue pollen. Siberian squill has blue pollen. And it's one of the fewer steel blue pollen that early in the spring. So if you see bees foraging with and carrying that, there's probably Siberian squill somewhere nearby. This is Galanthus or snowdrops, another one that can bloom through the snow. It's another really great pollen source. It is deer tolerant. It needs part shade. And depending, there's a lot of cultivars, whereas the other two, there's not so many, and you'll kind of just find the one. Galanthus has a lot of cultivars, oddly enough, and they're really all just variants of that picture that you see on the screen of white with a little bit of green marking on some of the petals. And some of them are shorter, some of them are bigger, some of them have more green, some of them don't. But there's nothing really outrageous with any of the varieties. So depending on what cultivar you have, you'll have various size ranges.
Since it doesn't bloom, or since it blooms through the snow, is that really a good plant for honeybees? Because
it is, because I shouldn't say blooms through the snow. It'll be blooming, in March. And so where there is drifts of snow, and there's still snow piled up from, your 12-inch snow blizzard that you had the other day. And then there's other spots where it's sunny and it is completely melted. That's where you'll see it. And that's around the time that you're going to start seeing honeybees forage. So I shouldn't say that it's blooming through 12 inches of snow. It'll be a little warmer than that. And everything that I'm actually talking about is blooming after red maple, which I kind of consider the first thing to really get noticed by either humans and or bees. And so, and willow too, I guess I should say that. And those two are the two that I feel like get missed the most because of temperatures. And then everything else after that is usually fair.
What about a red cedar? I mean, when the red cedar, you can see the pollen all over them when they come on. And
I've never seen honeybees or read anything about them feeding on it. It doesn't mean it doesn't happen, I guess. I just
yeah, I was curious, just because you see the red cedar about that same time as the maples with all the pollen on them.
Right.
I mean, you can see it from the road in the road ditches even,
And I don't know if that just means that it's not like the quality that they need or what, or if they are feeding and we just haven't seen it, I guess. I don't know. Add that to your research, Cody, for 2021. Grape hyacinth is another mid-spring bloomer. All shades of purple. There's white and yellow cultivars as well, but if you have grape hyacinth, why wouldn't you want purple? Very deer tolerant and a great pollen and nectar source. And so the flowers are super tiny. Each one of those little bells is one individual flower, but because they have so many flowers on one stem, it kind of makes it more worth the while for bees to be feeding on it. But it's a great plant. It naturalizes very, very well. So if you plant 5, eventually over time, it'll slowly spread like daffodils do. Daffodils are not necessarily something I would recommend for honeybees, but if you want spring bloom from bulbs, a few daffodils will eventually get you a big display, and tulips, on the other hand, are completely opposite. You'll start out with 5, and then soon you'll have 0. So they decrease over time. Daffodils increase over time. Muscari is the same way. It'll increase over time. No bulb is like aggressive, but it's just more of like, hey, I like it here, you know, kind of sending out more of itself. And Chinadoxa or Glory of the Snow, I've seen various findings, I guess, on what this provides as far as pollen or nectar. And I've seen bees feeding on it. It looked like they were collecting pollen, but also you can't really tell unless they have some on them. So maybe there's nectar too, but I'm guessing it's pollen. It's another early spring, pink, white, blue. They're mostly this blue shade that you see in this picture though. And again, another one that naturalizes well, so you get more bang for your buck. And then crocus are probably one of the earlier ones, another good pollen source. Full sun, it'll tolerate part shade, but they won't bloom as well. And again, depending on cultivar, we'll have various sizes. I just useless information. Want to talk about crocuses. The Crocus sativus on the left is where saffron comes from, right there in the picture. And on the right is Crocus tomasianus, which is a species of crocus that easily found. I think Ruby Giant is one of its cultivars that are supposedly not attracted to squirrels. Other crocus bulbs definitely are, but apparently Crocus tomasianus is not. But don't hold me to that. Okay, so lawns for pollinators kind of leads into the weed section. And there's been a really big push just in the last, well, it's been building, but definitely in the last year to tear out our yards. And I think that's fine. I think we should tear out the yards as they've been sold to us, but I will never not have some sort of turf grass because I have a dog. And so I will always have some sort of turf grass, but I will never have just turf grass in my lawn. And having lawns for pollinators is very easy if you let some weeds in. My rule of thumb for me personally in our yard is, can I walk barefoot on it? And if I can, then I don't care what it is that's growing. But if it's spiky or if it has anything that I can't walk on, sandburs are no, of course. But clover, as you see in this picture, fantastic for pollinators. It's great for the soil. And it's just a better ecosystem if you're going to have a lawn type situation at your house. Okay, so 3 lookalikes that bloom or start to bloom around the same time. 2 of them are beneficial to bees, and one of them is death. Not death to bees, it's just stupid and should be eradicated from the earth. The far left picture is henbit, and they're all in the mint family, so that's why it makes it especially convenient to try to differ between the 3. So henbit on the left, nectar and a pollen source. It's great. This is what you see blooming that's pink in cornfields before they start disking. The middle is purple dead nettle, and that's nectar only. And you can tell this one apart really from the other two because it kind of doesn't grow up, but it kind of has like some little stems that kind of rise up. And the tops of those always have kind of reddish purple foliage that you can see in this picture. And on the far right is Creeping Charlie, which is worthless and it's a perennial and I hate it. And if you have it in your yard, I'm sorry. The other two are annuals, I should clarify. Creeping Charlie is a perennial. It has the bluest flowers. It also has the most rounded scalloped leaves. And it'll take over wherever it is. And it takes multiple pesticide applications to get rid of it. So if you see the other two, fine, good, feeding bees. Creeping Charlie, bad, run away.
So go ahead, Mark.
What was that?
I'm wondering if either of those first two would help choke out the Creeping Charlie. I do have it in my yard, but only for 35 years or so, and I've tried to kill it.
I would say it would depend on how established the Creeping Charlie is and how established the henbit and purple nettle are, and probably even then not, because they're annuals and they just disappear after the spring, after they throw their seed, and Creeping Charlie is just like, oh, it's spring now, I'm getting ready to go, so a blowtorch. I really hate it. I don't know if you can tell, but I hate it.
So I was going to ask on the Creeping Charlie, I've seen bees working it. Is it just that there's nothing else?
I don't believe you.
Desperate?
I 100% don't believe you.
All right, I'll take you a picture this spring.
No, it's possible. It's also possible it could have been another mint flower.
That's why I was wondering too. I'm wondering
20 other ones that I'm not even talking about. Yeah.
Right.
Creeping Charlie foliage smells bad. Like they're all in the mint family, so they all have square stems.
Right.
But Creeping Charlie, I feel like, and so they all have a pungent odor, when their leaves are crushed. But I feel like Creeping Charlie is different. FYI. If they did, it wouldn't necessarily surprise me, but it's not something that I would expect to see them to go to on a regular basis. Let's say that. So yeah, like you said, maybe if they were desperate or.
And I was thinking I'd read something somewhere that only 12% of Creeping Charlie blossoms have nectar or pollen.
Okay.
That it's like they're tricking the insects, that they put out just enough.
Yeah. Like one out of all of those flowers has nectar in it, you mean?
Right, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, another reason to not like it.
Natalia, is Lamium in this group? Is Lamium in this group, and what are the benefits of Lamium?
Lamium is in this group. It would depend on which one, I think, if it's a nectar or pollen or both. But it's another mint family member, so probably to assume, I would say at least nectar.
Yeah, mine has yellow flowers, variegated leaf.
Okay. Yeah. I'd say at least nectar, unless it's a cultivar of ornamental that it's been bred out, which is possible. Okay, another weed is chickweed. I find it interesting that this is an important pollen and nectar source for the bees because this is a very tiny flower. I included two pictures because what you're used to seeing, or at least what I'm used to seeing, is that top picture. You can barely see the flowers and you can kind of see that weedy, stringy foliage, with the tiny little leaves on it. And then if you get up close though, that's what the flower actually looks like. And it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 petals, but they're so dissected that it looks like there's 10, but there's actually only 5 petals. Always white. It's an annual. So again, it'll flower early in the spring, throw seed down, and then be done. And so if you want to pull it out, if you want to leave it while it blooms, then you can easily pull it out because that's very diminutive root systems because it's an annual. You'll see it in part shade, some sun. It tolerates very wet soils, usually disturbed, so like new construction and things like that, but it does have a good pollen and nectar source, or is a good pollen and nectar source. I didn't want to talk about the mustards and the clovers too much, just because I feel like maybe you already know this, but sweet yellow clover, top left, white clover, sweet white clover below it, wild mustard top right, and then Dutch white clover on the bottom right. And all of them provide both nectar and pollen. And that is spring.
Isn't wild mustard an invasive plant?
Wild mustard is not invasive. It can be aggressive. And I would say garlic mustard is worse.
There's something that looks like it that I think.
There are.
Great. Does anybody have any questions for Natalia about other spring planting? Well, I'll get it started off. What do you think is maybe like the earliest? I know there's a lot of the early plants provide pollen.
Mm-hmm.
And you went through a whole list of plants just now. What do you think is some of the earliest? What are some of the earliest nectar producers?
Let me look at the list. And I can tell you. Actually, it would be redbud. If you're not going to count the maple and willow just because they may get missed, redbud is usually pretty safe time wise.
Great.
For those people that have just a ton of room or maybe a good neighborhood association that would share the planting chores to make it bee friendly, is there a list of these that show approximately when they're blooming so that we could plan what we're going to plant so that we are covering as much of the time span as possible with flowering plants? Especially trees, because I think trees put out a lot more pollen and nectar, per square foot that you use than any other kind of plant.
Yeah, I would say probably not, just because it's so hard for, like if you're making a plant list, to recommend, to put any sort of date on it is really hard because it's going to depend on the weather, like you have a late spring, you have an early spring. But then also that list is then really only accurate for that town, that part of town, like North Lincoln is different than South Lincoln. So there's organizations usually shy away from doing any sort of like, this is going to bloom this day. Or they'll say blooms March, but what March, March 2nd or March 30th. But the answer in horticulture is it depends. And so for that reason, there's not usually time lists. It doesn't mean I couldn't make one, but there's not usually ones just hanging around.
Would it be pretty consistent? This is the order they bloom in, not necessarily saying a date, but
yeah.
The apple will always be before the cherry, and the cherry will always be before the quince.
And I tried to do that for the most part. Oak and elm should probably move up a little bit, but everything else is pretty accurate.
On the oaks, are white oaks opposed to black oaks or red oak family?
As far as which one is more
Well,
preferred.
the white oak family versus the red oak family. I mean, black oaks is in the red oak family.
I don't know if I've seen any sort of preference, I guess. It doesn't mean there isn't, but I haven't seen it.
So as far as cold weather blooming, will the bulbs, is that your best case scenario for that? Because I live in an area where I always get froze off late.
Yeah. Well, if you get froze off for like fruit trees, like apricot and peach are pretty notorious for being just a hair too early. Cherry, plum, and pear are just a hair later. And so sometimes they can avoid that. If you wanted to talk about woody plants. But yeah, otherwise the earliest herbaceous would definitely be those bulbs.
We got a couple questions in the chat.
All right, hold on just a second.
I was going to just ask mine that I put in the chat too. I have a neighborhood association that puts out just a whole bunch of hanging basket plants on street lights. And I can't remember what plant they put in there, but I did research and I know it's not good for honeybees or any other pollinators.
Sure.
Do you have recommendations that I could suggest to them on what they could plant that is a draping kind of plant that looks good in a pot, that would do well getting watered about once a week or so every 10 days? Because they have trucks that, or a truck at least, that goes around and waters them pretty regularly. I don't know what their schedule is.
You know, Mark, I might have to think about that as far as the trailing goes. Because there's fewer of those, obviously, than just regular bushy little annuals. But I'm guessing, you know, because those street lamppost planters are pretty common, you know, in towns. And so they probably have, you know, like the filler part and the hanging part that they want to keep. So I don't know as far as draping, but also bee friendly. Because it'd also have to be super, super full sun. Can you turn that light on, please?
Or maybe what I really need is a combination of plants. Maybe if there's something that would stand straight up and circle lower, you know, mid-range or lower, and ideally, because I think this is just what they like, if it would drape down over cascade.
Sure.
You know, but maybe I need a trifecta kind of approach.
Right.
And I'll send you my email. I don't.
Okay. Yeah, I'll keep thinking about that.
And did you display your email earlier?
I did. Let me pull it back up. It's natalia.bjorklund@gmail.com, and I just have to point out that if you do not spell that right, I will not get it. And I spell it wrong all the time, so make sure that you spell it right.
Thank you.
You bet.
Natalia, is that the hybrid, like he's talking about hanging baskets, and right away I think of the trailing petunias and maybe some medium stand. Isn't it true that those are pretty much pollen free, the hybrid plants like that?
Yes, that is correct. Every once in a while, you'll find one variety that somehow has attracted something. And so I don't know if it means it has, excuse me, pepper in the Bloody Mary. If it means that it has a really strong nectar guide that obviously they didn't care about, you know, when they were breeding that, or if it does actually have nectar and or pollen. But yeah, every once in a while. But yeah, usually the Calibrachoa and the petunias and geranium are just ornamental for our eyes only.
There was a question in the chat about partridge pea. Did you have photo. They want to know if there's a photo. It is a yellow flower.
It is. I showed this picture of the nectaries, the extra floral nectaries. You guys still see that? Yeah, the flower. Let me hold on. Let me just Google it.
Partridge pea blooms after June though, doesn't it?
No, probably, but that was
Well, you were showing the
I wanted to show the
plant
next
parts.
Yeah. So it's pretty. It's pretty, you know. But it's yellow. It's always that yellow.
You would have to switch what screen you're sharing. We can't see.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
We weren't able to see your Google search. Oh, Zoom.
Well, no, I can't.
I think you
Yeah,
were going to
I've got
share
a big patch of partridge pea, and the bumblebees really love it. But the honeybees work a little bit.
Yeah.
Our research shows that partridge pea is one of the main summer pollen sources for our bees.
Really?
Yep. Clover and partridge pea are the two main things that they're collecting pollen from.
Now, see, that's a good point, because can you guys see the yellow flower now?
Yep.
Okay, so that's partridge pea. What I have observed, like looking at partridge pea and like hearing that, you know, is not always the same. So if you guys see honeybees consistently year after year feeding on plant X, then plant more of plant X. I never see honeybees on partridge pea, ever. I rarely even see in wild bees. But the literature says that it's very important for pollinators, not just honeybees. And so I would never not include it, but yeah, so and serviceberry is another example. Like technically I could have included that because it would be an early spring shrub, but it was in my research and I didn't see a single bee on it in 3 years' time. So then it's like, well, what does that mean? Like, are people just saying this plant is good because it blooms in the spring? Because clearly it's not.
Well, and I think that maybe our bees in our research, it had to do with our sites too. So a lot of our sites were near areas where it was almost exclusively agricultural land.
Yeah.
And so when the bees are out there and there's a dearth of flowering plants, they're sort of like probably they prioritize which ones they want to go to first. Partridge pea is all, you know, there's no more clover left, then they're definitely going to be going to the partridge pea. It might be in that sort of situation too.
You know, and that's a good point, you know, too. I think that it's another plant that if you have one plant, you're not necessarily going to see anything feed on it. But if you see a whole field of it, then generally they're more likely to be found there, I guess. That is not really the way to answer that, but yeah, so.
And I think time of day even, because like my experience with partridge pea, I walk the dogs through it in the early morning. The bumblebees are buzzing on it. If I go back later in the day when it's warmer, the honeybees are in it too.
Right. Yeah. Yep. That's a good point. Yep. That time of day, as far as what is available from the flower to the bee is definitely a factor.
Natalia, there's a few questions that I have here for you in the chat. The first one is, I collected a large amount of wildflower seed, including aster, to plant on an empty blot. What can I do to improve spring germination of these seeds that I planted last fall?
Did you plant them outside last fall?
Kent, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Right before we got the frost.
Okay. So then you're not going to have to do anything, and at this point it's too late to do anything anyhow. But if you planted them outside, that's what they need. A lot of people will get wildflower seeds and plant them in the spring, not realizing that they need a cold, wet period to break dormancy. And so if you had just collected them but not actually planted them yet, then I would say you need to put them in the fridge in like a moist towel or something. But if they're outside, then they're going to get that cold, moist period anyhow, and so germination shouldn't be an issue.
Okay.
Natalia, the next question is, what about lamium?
Oh yeah, that was the question that we talked about, that it is a mint. And I'm assuming that it's a nectar source. I don't know about the pollen.
Thanks. The next question is, what time of year do the oak trees provide pollen and peach?
It's spring, and it's depending on the variety of oak. Some of them are earlier than others, but usually I would say March to probably first part of May, early May. But there's so many oaks that it's hard to say, like, they're all going to bloom on April 15th.
Okay, next question is from Clay. It says, if it is true that it takes about 8 pounds of honey to make a pound of wax, and it takes about 2 million flowers to make a pound of honey, then it takes about 16 million flowers to make a pound of wax. Is it realistic to believe a homeowner can plant enough flowers to really help the bees?
It is realistic to think that we can help. It is unrealistic to think that you are going to plant anything and the bees are never going to leave your property because they're going to be completely fed. That is completely unrealistic. Even if you have like the most fantastic, diverse flower fields, unless you have your hives in the center of 3,000 acres of diverse, fantastic fields, they're going to go off site. So anything that you do plant will help. But it's not realistic to think that they're going to stay on your property.
Okay, next question is from Rick. Is that pollen you see come off broom grass? Do bees like that?
It is pollen, and I don't, as a general rule, and there are exceptions, grass pollen, including corn, is not generally attractive to any bee. They will collect it if they have to, but very rarely.
Okay, next question. In the spring, my bees are on yellow flowers on dogwood-like bushes. Any idea of what this might be?
On yellow flowers, on dogwood-like bushes. No, and it is not forsythia. I can guarantee you that, which is yellow.
Maybe ask them. I'll ask them to send us a picture, and then
I was
maybe
gonna
we
say,
can
Jenny,
forward it to you.
can you give any other description? Otherwise, yeah, send a picture.
Yeah, if you can send a picture to the Bee Lab, you can just email us. I'll put our email in the chat box, and if you just want to send us a picture of that, we can forward it to Natalia, and she can help you answer that question.
Luke, I can see the chat box now, and I just want to point out that you skipped your own comment that Creeping Charlie was used to make beer before hops became popular, and I do not believe that it turned out great. You were clearly drunk when you tried it.
So actually, the first time that he made it, it didn't turn out as good, and then the second time, it actually turned out decent. I enjoyed it the second time. You don't agree?
100% do not believe you.
Have you tried any of that? No.
No.
I don't think she
would. You even give it a chance?
She really dislike Creeping Charlie.
I'm trying to get across to you guys that if you have Creeping Charlie, you need to burn your house down and sell the property.
I think we need to promote this idea to all the little local brewers and urge them to come to my house to get all their raw ingredients.
You should market it, Mark, and
I'll-
then be like, look, this is a holistic way of making beer. Come buy it from me.
Yeah, I've had an organic yard for 30 years, so yeah, come and get it. And I have to really entice them. I'll say, bring as many people as you want. For $5 an hour, I'll let you harvest my crop.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Okay, Natalia, there's another question. I have several bags of sweet clover still in the bag. What do I do to get it going in the spring?
If you do any sort of, oh my God, I'm drawing a blank. What's that called? Aerate. Sorry. If you aerate your lawn, after you aerate in the spring, throw the seed down And that would be a great way to get good soil to seed contact. Depending on how old that seed is, it might not have a very high germination rate, but I would never throw seed away. Like, at least throw it out into the lawn and hope for the best. But other than that, there's not really a whole lot that you need to do.
Should it be frozen or refrigerated for 6 weeks before you scatter it?
No.
Okay. Because I've got some too.
Yeah, I just put it out.
Okay, Natalia,
Sorry.
Mark did ask, do you know what fall blooming witch hazel trees?
Yes, the fall blooming and the spring blooming both attract bees, but I don't know if I would say that they are attractive to honeybees. They are to other pollinators, but not specifically honeybees. And even then, I mean, it's not a whole lot. It's not like, you know, like autumn joy sedum, how like when you see that growing, like it's covered in honeybees when it's blooming. Like witch hazel is just like, I'll have a snack. Autumn joy sedum is like, I am here to eat.
Judy just put this in the chat, so I just want to bring it to people's attention.
Sorry, I was a little distracted during Natalia's talk just because this just got posted in the news. And ethanol plant that is processing treated seeds has been officially shut down.
Yay!
That's awesome.
Yeah, we testified. Actually, I testified on Wednesday, and there was a lot of like some really strong statements being made, like, and questions about why it's still in operation, given what we know. And so it's been awesome to see such a quick response.
That's
A, that
awesome.
was super quick, and B, way to go, because remember when this started and you were like, oh God.
For those of you who don't know, Judy noticed that at one of the sites where she was placing her hives, she was having massive bee kills, sickly bees, just strange things happening. She was able to track this down like Aaron Brockovich back to this plant. Ethanol plants are supposed to treat seed to make ethanol, but these ones were, they use seed to make ethanol, but they're not supposed to use treated seed that have pesticides on it. They were just dumping the pesticides out, and it was contaminating the whole area nearby. It's a big deal.
That's huge.
Yeah, it was a quick response because of the federal loopholes. There's no way to stop them because, you know, most of the states follow federal guidance, and you have to create new state restrictions to kind of tighten things up. And so there was this inability to do anything about it because of these loopholes. So we got the people, the state legislators to you know, kind of push through some bills that would stop this from happening. And this whole process has kind of been really a long going process, and a lot of people from NDE and NDA and all these other folks have kind of in the community has really kind of stepped up. But I gotta say, the bees are the ones that really push things. So way to go, bees. Biological indicator species.
And we can't rest. We have to get the good bills passed on this issue, because there's really nothing stopping them from starting up again, more than likely.
Yeah.
And great question, Tony. Who's going to pay for cleanup? Well, that's still something people are trying to figure out. They are proposing. So this is, I'm going to put two bills in the chat. You guys can look these up, but really LB 507 is the one that shuts the process down, not allowing plants to do this. And LB 634 is trying to target the seed companies that use this for civil liability on cleanup efforts and anything else. So, I mean, these are just proposed bills, so we need to get them passed in order for this to actually get something done about it. Right. Well, lots of good news to end with.
I was gonna say that's way more important than anything I said today.
No, it's not, because what you said emphasizes the need to get this under control, because those spring flowers are the ones that we really need to, you know, be careful of watching our bees or getting resources in the spring. The rain is going to kind of, you know, come on, and all these flowers are going to start blooming. So it's a perfect time. It all connects.
I'm going to put my
Natalia
email in the chat again.
Yes, please.
And FYI,
Natalia is still really connected with the Bee Lab. So if you guys have any other questions for her or want to connect with her, just reach out to her directly, or you can connect with us if you don't have her email or lose her contact. Randall, anything else?
Virtual Bee Fun Day next weekend.
Yeah.
February 13th. University of Nebraska is hosting, and a bunch of organizations like Iowa State are helping support. There's going to be some really great speakers there. How do people find out more about it?
I'd say our Facebook page, UNLB Lab, would be a great resource to find our information.
And this is a free event, but donations are optional, I guess, are welcome.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then for those who you don't know the lineup, we've got Mike Palmer as our keynote, and he's going to talk about double nuke systems. We've got several researchers from Iowa who's going to talk about some of their projects with prairie strips. And there's also a woman who's going to be doing a cool talk on honey sales and compliance, right? Marketing and compliance.
Making sure that you're meeting federal compliance to sell food to other people for direct sales. Yeah.
Yeah. The other really cool thing about this year's Fun Day is that we have carved out a breakout sessions that are Ask the Expert panel sessions. So no talks, just Q&A. And we've got 6 different breakout sessions for those that are interested in value-added products, plants and plantings, and pollinator-friendly landscaping. We've got a local queen rearing interest group. We've got the Varroa IPM and troubleshooting, which Randall and I will help, lead discussions in there. And we've got some Beekeeper 101 things. So check it out. And we look forward to seeing you guys next week.
Great. Thanks everyone for coming today. If we don't see you next week, we'll see you the first Friday in March. Is that right, Judy?
Yep.
Okay. Awesome.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Congrats again, Judy.
Team effort. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah, that's awesome news, Judy. I'm really glad to hear that.
Really, you said it's been a long process, but really it hasn't been.
Well, it feels like it for me because this all happened during COVID isolation.
Let's think about Erin Brockovich and how long it took her to shut down PG&E.
Yeah. And nobody forced your car into a ditch or anything like that.
It's funny. All right, guys. Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Bye.